the outstanding speakers who have been engaged with issues of green corruption. We will be learning from the experts on this regard. And let me kindly introduce our speakers. So firstly, we have Mr. Rafael Jimenez Ibar. He is the Environmental Democracy Advisor at Westminster Foundation for Democracy. Mr. Rafael has 15 years of experience supporting parliamentarians worldwide to advance environmental governance. He has also led the formulation and delivery of capacity building interventions to facilitate the exchange of best legislative practices. Today, Mr. Rafael will explore the discussions under the topic of environmental democracy as an anecdote to green corruption. We've had a lot of experience with Mr. Rafael. We've met before as well online, and so it's refreshing to meet in person. And we have engaged in a lot of discussions with regards to particularly climate change, climate mitigation, and in all sorts of forms. And so welcome, Mr. Rafael. And we also have Mr. Juhani Grossman. He leads the Basel Institute's Green Corruption Program, which targets environmental degradation through an anti-corruption, asset recovery, and governance approach. He previously spent 9 years leading anti-corruption and good governance programs in Indonesia. And today, Mr. Grossman will join us virtually to deliver his presentation about Parliament's role in combating green corruption. So welcome, and thank you again for joining. And third, we also have Mr. Fitriadi Muslim on my right. He is the Director of Law and Regulation of the Indonesian Financial Transaction Reports and Analysis Center, or PPATK. He holds his master's degree on law from the University of Indonesia, one of the best universities here, and has been engaged with the issues of law and regulations, including those related to the anti-money laundering, counter-financing of terrorism. Today, Mr. Muslim will share with us about green financial crime and how to strengthen legislative measures and parliamentary collaboration. I think this is really important for us to take note as well. So welcome, Mr. Fitriadi. And before we start our discussion with the panelists, as I previously introduced, we will also hear a keynote address from Professor Rodrigo Herrera Bravo, Chair of GOPAC Global Task Force on Participation of Society in Open Parliament. Welcome. He flew all the way here. I think it was around a 30 or so hour flight he was mentioning to me, so we're very happy to have you here. He's traveling in 2 days' time, so let's make this session a very good one. He was also a Buenos Aires Member of Parliament, Undersecretary for Strategic Planning, and now is the Chief of Cabinet of the Trade Secretary Ministry of Economy of the Argentine Republic. An amazing experience, I would say, and he has led the Foundation of Strategic Dialogue since 2011. Today, Professor Rodrigo will give a keynote address to give us a background for our discussion and share about how the GOPAC Global Task Force on Participation of Society and Open Parliament could strengthen partnership in really just eradicating and combating the issue of green corruption. So, without further ado, Professor Rodrigo, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. And let me first say thanks to GOPAC and SEAPAC for the invitation. I am the chair of the GTF on participation of society and open government. And I brought a presentation, perhaps if we can share it, because I'm going to speak about open parliament as a strategy to fight against corruption. First, I'd like to say is at GTF, participation of society and open parliament. We have the next slide, please. We have an Indonesian member, Mr. Mardani Ali Sera, and a Fiji member that I think, I thought he was here, but oh,
He's there.
you're there. Because we have met by Zoom only, and okay, we'll
Now
speak
you meet in person.
afterwards. Please, next slide. Okay, I would like to introduce you the case of Argentina in fighting against corruption, particularly on open parliament experience. First of all, let me tell you that Argentina is a federal state. It's a big country, one of the, it is the 8th country in terms of square meters in the world. And we have a federal organization with 23 provincial states and one capital. The capital is an autonomous city. It was to be a municipality, a local government, until the constitutional reform in 1994, and then become an autonomous city. Okay, that is nearly a province in terms of autonomy. We have a legislative power with 2 chambers, a Senate and a Chamber of Representatives. We call it Cámara de Diputados de la Nación. I'm sorry we speak Spanish in Argentina. And the model of our constitution and our organizational our constitutional organization is the American model. Yes, the model of the American Constitution. So an executive power, presidentialist power, yes, and legislative power with two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and each chamber has different ways of composition and representation, because the Senate represents the provinces and the city of Buenos Aires, and the Chamber of Deputies of Representatives represents the people. Let's go to the next slide. I choose to show you the logos in order to show you the different number of members. Yes, in the Senate, we have 72 members. That's 3 members for each province and 3 for the capital city. Yes, and that 3 are 2 for the majority party and 1 for the first minority party. Okay, so it's that determines how they discuss and how they decide the Senate. And the representative chamber has 257 members, and the number is linked to the population of each province. So the biggest province of Argentina has 70 members, and the smallest has 5 members. Yes? But in the Senate, all of them has 3 members. Okay, it's just like the American model of the legislative power. Please, let's go to the next slide. Okay, I was speaking with the Philippines representative in the break about the constitutional reform. Okay, because they have told me that they are, well, studying or something like that process in Philippines. In Argentina, the constitution was written in 1853, and it was reformed, completely reformed, in 1994. Okay, so some new articles were included in 1994, and one of them is this one, the Article 41, that is the environmental constitutional provisions, that of course has some concepts, new concepts that didn't exist in 1853, like the sustainable development. This article of the Constitution asks the Parliament to build some laws that didn't exist before, some protection law, and there is something new in the legal framework, in the Argentine legal framework at that moment in 1994. That was the obligation of recomposition of the environmental damage. Yes. Please, next. Okay. The lawmaking procedures in Argentina, there is a normal procedure established for regular laws. Both chambers must participate on the legislation process, and of course that discussion ends on the role of the executive power that can make a veto or can decide that law becomes into the legislation. And I take some words of Mr. Adam Graycar of the first session, who spoke about making and implementing the law. Yes, and that corruption follows opportunity, he said. And yeah, you have two different moments where corruption can appear on the process of elaboration of the laws in the legislative power, but strongly in the process of ruling that law in the executive power. So the Constitution also says that there are some specific draft of law that must begin in one particular chamber. For example, the budget law, the general budget law that the Parliament has to vote every year, must begin at the Chamber of Representatives, and for example, the co-participation expenses, the co-participation incomes must be discussed first in the Senate. Yes, there are some specific laws that must begin in one chamber. In 1994, some particular institutions of the democracy were included in the text, like the popular initiative. That is it's a way. It's a tool for people to participate on the generation of a draft of law. The popular initiative requires 1.5% of the population to sign the intention to present a draft of law at the Chamber of Deputies. Yes, and after 1.5% of the population wants to put in discussion a draft of law, the Chamber of Deputies has the obligation to do it, not to approve it, but to discuss the point in the term of 1 year. Okay, some legislation has become some draft of law has become law after this process, and the other one is the popular consultation that allows both the executive power but the legislative power to put into consideration of the population some draft of law they are discussing. This procedure was very important, for example, in Argentinian history, in order to avoid a very big conflict we had with the Republic of Chile about 3 small islands in the south of the continent. Yes, there was a claim of Chile and also of Argentina about the sovereignty of those 3 islands. We were going into war, and a popular consultation made by President Raúl Alfonsín at that moment put into consideration of the society we should accept or not the decision of the Vatican, that was the mediator between two countries, and the popular consultation result made the executive power of that moment to take a decision accepting the decision of the Vatican City. Next, please. Okay, about open parliament procedures. This is rather new for Argentina. We began with this process in 2016, 7 years ago. The House of Representatives, the Chamber of Deputies, created the Modernization, Transparency, Innovation and Democratic Informants Program, and the Open Parliament Network as a link with NGOs specialized on parliament monitoring. You are watching in every slide to a logo of Fundación Diálogos Estratégicos. That is one of that NGOs that are part of this Open Parliament Network that was created by the House of Representatives. In 2018, the House of Representatives created the platform on open data. Yes, and 2019 to 2021, yes, the first platform of open draft of law began to work. This is important because in 2019 we had a change of government and a change of party in charge of government, but the program, yes, was followed. So it's a kind of acceptation of both big parties, yes, about that this is a policy that must continue. Please, next, I'm finishing. Well, you have here a link. Let's go to the next one. This is how you can see when you go into the link in the slide before. This is the way you can participate. You as a citizen can participate on a process of discussing a draft of law. So of course this procedure is optional, it's not compulsory for the members of parliament. Okay, but members of parliament can open to the public and to NGOs the discussion about a draft of law. Yes, and a citizen or an NGO have to register. Yes, and a citizen or an NGO can show in which article or which concept he wants to discuss, and he can discuss through the net, giving the opinion or a suggestion, or discussing with an advisor or with the MP if he or she is attending the session at that moment. Okay, there you have the link, and you have it in The previous slide. Next slide, please. Okay, some subjects related to green corruption that were or are being discussed in this procedure, open parliament and open laws. Yes, food sovereignty. This is an important subject, important issue in Argentina because we are producers of food. So this is an important issue and an important issue where corruption can be fought with these procedures. Humidity natural areas, ley de humedales, we say, how to proceed when some natural areas that should be protected are invaded or are attacked in order to include these areas into productive activities. Another subject we are discussing through these new procedures is the use of renewable energies and how the transition to renewable energies is monitored by specialized NGOs or the public in general. There is a strong compromise of the Secretary of Energy of the executive power in order to share information with the public. And last. Next. Okay. So I remarked some results in this short period of 6 or 7 years. There's more engagement between MPs and citizens. That's really important. Growth of participation, even during the pandemic of COVID. Yes, intensive use of TICs, NGOs as multiplicants, open data and transparency preventing green corruption. Okay, that's all, and I'll wait for your opinions, and I'm here to participate. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Rodrigo, for that keynote, very insightful keynote speech, mentioning about the fact that there needs to be a regulation for environmental preservation and transparency for public accountability. You spoke about open parliament as well, and how there's been a reformation of the Constitution in 1994, where there are new articles which very much focuses more on sustainable development and enforcing not only the government but parliamentarians to really just act on and implement policies that can help achieve the sustainable development goals, right? So this is something that is very insightful and very inspiring, I think, for a lot of countries. And just to share, because you mentioned as well about the open parliament system, in which Indonesia is also, we also have this system in place. So the society and the public have the opportunity to participate and comment, give feedback on the policies that are currently being discussed. But of course, as you mentioned as well, there needs to be a lot of improvements, right, going forward. So thank you very much. This has become a very important learning experience as well for all of us. And as well as Pak Mardani, we know that he is also a member, an active member, as Mr. Rodrigo has mentioned. So I'm very proud as well to have him on board in discussions that have already taken place. So now we would like to extend the floor to Mr. Rafael. So you have 15 minutes to deliver your remarks, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Westminster Foundation for Democracy, and it's an absolute pleasure and honor to be here, to be able to contribute to this SEAPAC session on green corruption and in such distinguished company. So I'd like to introduce the notion of environmental democracy as a conceptual background to the discussion, somehow building on this idea that was put forward earlier on by Dr. Welsh and Professor Graycar on this ecosystem that is needed to combat corruption. So let's look at the vision of environmental democracy. The foundations for this approach, for this vision, were established in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration, which emerged from the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, the Earth Summit. It reads as follows. If we can put the first slide, please. The second now. One more, please. Thank you. So it reads, environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens at the relevant level. At the national level, each individual shall have appropriate access to information concerning the environment that is held by public authorities, including information on hazardous materials and activities in their communities, and the opportunity to participate in decision-making processes. States shall facilitate and encourage public awareness and participation by making information widely available. Effective access to judicial and administrative proceedings, including redress and remedy, shall be provided. Some of these fundamental concepts related to environmental democracy were embedded in Article 6 of On Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, as well as in the other two Rio Conventions. And the importance of this vision has also been embedded in other international frameworks, such as the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. So we see that there are three critical rights that form the pillars of environmental democracy. We have the notion of transparency, that is the right to freely access information on the environment, because openness and transparency are required to help citizens, civil society, the media, businesses, and the courts, and the international community understand what's happening in relation to the environment and how governments are responding. And we have the second pillar, principle of right of participation, the right of citizens to participate meaningfully in environmental decision-making. The public, particularly the most affected by climate change and environmental degradation, need to be able to voice their concerns and influence policymaking for the right decisions to be made and for the decisions to have legitimacy. And finally, we have the pillar of environmental justice, that is access to justice to enforce environmental laws, as well as to seek redress or compensation from wrongdoing. Because if enforcement of environmental legislation and treaties is to have meaning, and people's human rights are to be respected, particularly the rights of indigenous groups and environmental defenders, then there must be effective mechanisms for challenging the action or the inaction of governments enacting as environmental stewards. Next slide, please. So, WFD launched its Environmental Democracy Initiative in 2020, and it is now mainstreaming environmental issues across our portfolio. This move was predicated on the realization that, firstly, there are strong linkages between actions to address climate and environmental crisis and actions to strengthen democracy. And secondly, because in fact both issues are interdependent. Because of this correlation, corruption and policy capture due to collusion with vested interests are major drivers of environmental degradation and incoherent policies more broadly. Natural resource sectors, including minerals, oil and gas, energy, water, forestry, wildlife, and fisheries, are highly vulnerable to corruption due to the revenues generated by resource exploitation, management, and trade. So when we launched the initiative, we wanted to understand these dynamics a bit better and how they play out in different parts of the world, and engage inter alia with EU4, the Anti-Corruption Resource Center based in Norway, to enrich our thinking. Southeast Asia is a region rich in natural capital. This natural capital accounts for a large share of national wealth, while sustaining the livelihoods of local communities. However, countries in ASEAN are facing major challenges to their environment, national prosperity and well-being, because environmental crime, illegal wildlife trade, illegal timber trade, and land use change driven by agriculture, mining, and land grabbing are major challenges across the region. ASEAN countries continue to post some of the highest annual rates of illegal logging, land use change, and loss of ecosystems and biodiversity worldwide. They also show a low rate of penetration of clean energy due to multiple factors, including policy capture and vested interests in fossil fuels. So even where, for example, hydropower is being developed, the energy mix can be subject to conflicts of interest around tendering, collusion, and the neglect of local communities' human rights. Next slide, please. So let's go back now to the 3 pillars of environmental democracy. How does corruption interfere with these 3 access rights? Well, in the first place, corruption undermines access to information about the state of the environment in a number of ways, all of which result in a disincentivization of the release of timely and reliable data on environmental performance, natural resource use, and also on extractive-focused economic development projects, and their benefits, or indeed their drawbacks. This makes it much harder to ensure that appropriate policies are aligned with environmental goals. A number of initiatives have tried to improve access to information and transparency of data around natural resource use and natural resource-based economic development, but opacity is very much the rule in many countries. We must also view this considering the recent trends towards de-democratization and rising authoritarianism in a number of places. Investigative journalism, for example, in the context of the UK-supported GECO project in the Indonesia for Sale reporting, around the use of shell companies to hide earnings from large-scale deforestation-driving projects in Papua province would be an example. It's true that there are initiatives at the national level that aim to enhance access to information about the environment in corruption-prone sectors in certain countries, like, for example, again in Indonesia, the One Map, One Data policy, which collate all the environmental data change across a number of land-based sectors. But researchers are finding that these initiatives can be easily hobbled, weakened, when the wider context for anti-corruption efforts becomes more constrained, so that the original notions of making this data available and freely accessible to anyone, including members of the public, may be backtracked on if the political climate around anti-corruption changes, regardless of any legal provisions in place that this information should have been available or provided proactively by the authorities. So there is a gap in enforcement, which is why this meeting is important, because you parliamentarians are uniquely placed to push for enforcement of these anti-corruption laws. Corruption also undermines the access to participation. It can reinforce top-down decision-making or decision-making among very few actors, often taking place rather informally in relations between economic and political actors. This constrains access to participation, but precisely how it does it depends on the form and the structure of the corruption in place. In some places, it can be organized quite hierarchically, organized in a top-down manner, but in other contexts, it can be much more dispersed and disorganized. Policy network analysis is a methodology that is being used to track the coal sector in developing countries, including Indonesia, to understand the networks of policy influence work in relation to the thermal coal sector, how it works in Indonesia, and how that influences environmental decision-making. And finally, corruption also constrains access to justice on environmental matters in 2 main ways. Corruption can affect policies and laws so that they are unjust from the social and environmental perspective right from the start. And secondly, corruption in the justice system and legal enforcement efforts can also undermine any effort to bring legal remedies for injustices, which manifest by strategic litigation. The Indonesian Corruption Eradication Commission, APK, has been very active launching anti-corruption prosecutions in the forest sector over the past decade. And many of the cases have been prosecuted, and there have been actually some noticeable prosecution successes. So I would encourage parliamentarians to engage with them and similar bodies in their countries, with experts, to see whether more can be done to prosecute firms and individuals surrounding these cases, and how these cases relate to other issues, particularly party funding, and to pay attention to what type of broader social support there is for this kind of prosecution work. Next slide, please. So I will not delve too much into the sort of domestic activity that parliamentarians could undertake. I'm sure that the next speaker, Mr. Grossman, will look into this more closely. But I would like to propose that it is important that parliamentarians can be part of the problem or part of the solution. So in some cases, parliaments cannot be said to work in the public interest because of corruption and other interests. So the problem is how to incentivize actors in the systems to change the system when they benefit from the status quo. However, incremental change can be advanced through strategic litigation and through alliances, as has been said before, between activist legislators and new political or civil society movements. And it has been interesting to follow the work in the UK of British MPs Margaret Hodge and Andrew Mitchell on beneficial ownership transparency for UK overseas territories. As an example of this new legislation and its adoption and implementation, which in fact are political processes that require a lot of hard work over the long term, but also require and relate to many other policy priorities and interests which need to be brought into the picture. Secondly, empowering society would transform the context in which corruption occurs. This is why it would be very important to put in place legislation to ensure that participation becomes the norm when it comes to environmental decision-making and climate action. Combating corruption would be not the only reason to do this, for instance, but it would be important to provide a legal basis and an ambitious vision to national actions under the UNFCCC Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, to deliver the Glasgow Work Programme on ACE adopted at COP26 in Edinburgh. It is, in Glasgow. It is true that it would be very beneficial to combat corruption, but on top of that, enhancing participation will actually become politically indispensable if countries really try to deliver on their ever more ambitious and disruptive climate and biodiversity commitments. So if their lifestyles are going to change, people will expect to be told why and to have a say on how. And politicians will need to secure a strong mandate from people to advance these reforms. Next slide, please. So the second way forward I propose is, in fact, strengthening environmental democracy regionally as the antidote against green corruption. Because at the root of this problem, we often find public and private collusion or the fusing of economic and political power, which is not the same thing as collusion, where the economic and political powers are essentially the same. The solution to both requires, firstly, structural state reforms to try and separate the private economic interest from public interest. In other words, we need more transparency. We need a stronger first pillar of environmental democracy in ASEAN. This could be reforms related to political party financing, reforms about making clear who stands behind economic interest so that they can be better regulated in the public sphere, and that is to say, enhance beneficial ownership transparency. Also, more and more non-state actors are pursuing opportunities for regulatory and legal reform through the use of strategic litigation, but also investigative journalism and international advocacy campaigns that link up networks of actors working on similar issues in different places. The state's effort to stamp out corruption can be reinforced by these broader societal developments in terms of media campaigns, NGO campaigns, and journalism that all come together to create momentum for reform. It is clear that civil society organizations are playing a critical role around the world in fighting green corruption and environmental degradation more broadly. They are playing this role even at the cost of their lives. Global Witness reports that the number of environmental defenders assassinated every year keeps on growing, and some ASEAN countries have some of the world's worst figures. This is why strengthening and protecting them could make a big difference to enhance their beneficial participation in decision-making in political life. In parallel, as I mentioned, people's participation in decision-making on the environment is going to become politically indispensable if countries really intend to deliver on their multilateral commitments. So we need a second pillar of environmental democracy that is strengthened in ASEAN as well. The 2010 Bali guidelines of the UN Environment Programme, UNEP, provide guidance to developing national and subnational legislation informed by environmental democracy principles. However, given the seriousness of the matter, in other regions of the world, the principles of environmental democracy have been embedded comprehensively in regional legal instruments, including the Aarhus Convention in 1998, where 47 parties across Europe and Central Asia come together, and in 2018, the Escazú Agreement, with 22 signatories across Latin America and the Caribbean, with new provisions focused on protecting environmental human rights defenders. These regional environmental democracy agreements, or REDAs, are vital to strengthen national ownership of environmental democracy principles and empower civil society organizations, because they are helpful to raise local awareness of environmental rights. They can reflect regional challenges and priorities, like in this case, in terms of protection of environmental activists in Latin America, and because they codify explicit commitments of countries and lead to the development of domestic legislation that is favorable to environmental democracy, and because they trigger a conducive regional dynamic of peer pressure. So while Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean already have a REDA, neither Africa nor Asia have developed any REDAs, despite being home of some of the Earth's most critically endangered ecosystems, and with some countries relatively strong performance in different environmental democracy indicators. This is why I would very much like to invite legislators present here to consider the relevance of pushing for the adoption of a regional environmental democracy agreement in ASEAN, in partnership with regional cooperation bodies and CSOs, as an indispensable building block of regional efforts to stamp out green corruption. The situation of environmental defenders is not as bad here as it is in Latin America, so perhaps the focus of REDA in ASEAN could be combating green corruption. WFD cooperates with the secretariats of Aarhus Convention and the Escazú Agreement, and we would be delighted, together with many other transparency organizations, to accompany you to champion this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rafael, for that very, very interesting presentation. I think we learned a lot as well from what you have conveyed to us. I think we all can agree that environmental crimes and corruption are threatening the livelihoods of people and citizens all over the world. It's national prosperity as well as environmental well-being, and I think it was very important that we now understand what the three pillars of environmental democracy consist of, that being transparency, participation, as well as justice. And we do like to also commend the work that the Westminster Foundation for Democracy have presented in a lot of different cases and opportunities. And I think the implementation of all of these pillars are very vital in creating a sustainable future for all, and moving on to also the kinds of solution that can be presented. And again, that extends to how all sectors, multiple sectors, can work together in enacting not only policies, but also making sure that the government is also playing its role in creating this open system in ensuring that the environmental democracy does happen. So thank you very much. And now we would like to go to our next speaker, Mr. Fitriadi Muslim. Please, the floor is yours. You have as well 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderators. Allow me to speak and deliver my presentation in Bahasa. Pertama-tama, saya ingin menyampaikan ucapan terima kasih dan salam hangat dari Kepala PPATK, Bapak Dr. Ivan Yustia Pandana, yang kebetulan pada saat yang bersamaan harus memimpin delegasi Indonesia menghadiri sidang FATF di Paris. Karena itu beliau menyampaikan permohonan maaf dan berharap event ini dapat terselenggara dan menghasilkan sesuatu yang bermanfaat. Yang kami hormati Presiden SEAPAC dan seluruh peserta conference. Sebuah kehormatan bagi PPATK diberikan kesempatan untuk sharing atau berbagi, menjelaskan mengenai green financial crime, terutama dalam kaitan dengan memperkuat upaya-upaya legislatif dan juga kolaborasi parlemen untuk mewujudkan green financial crime. Bapak Ibu, para peserta konferensi yang kami hormati, mohon ditampilkan tayangan kami. Ya. Next slide, please. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, kalau kita lihat apa yang disampaikan oleh FATF ya, mereka juga, FATF ini adalah badan yang mengeluarkan standar internasional di bidang pencegahan dan pemberantasan money laundering dan juga pendanaan terorisme serta pencegahan pendanaan proliferasi. Di dalam guidance-nya PT menyebut juga mengenal ya financial crime sebagai salah satu tindak pidana asal daripada money laundering. Tindak pidana asal atau environmental crimes di situ disebut melingkupi perkebunan, kemudian industri ekstraktif, kemudian perlindungan terhadap satwa liar, fauna, termasuk juga minerba. Dan berdasarkan catatan dari FATF, proceed of crime yang terkait dengan environmental crimes ini cukup besar, yaitu sekitar 110 hingga 281 miliar dolar per tahun. Slide berikutnya. Ini menggambarkan bahwa environmental crime itu terkait dengan beberapa kejahatan juga ya. Jadi environmental di sini baik itu illegal logging, illegal mining maupun wasted trafficking ya. Itu bisa terkait dengan kejahatan tindak pidana korupsi ya. Terkait dengan suap menyuap, kemudian penerbitan izin maupun sertifikat yang terkait dengan lingkungan, di mana di dalamnya terjadi tindak pidana korupsi. Kemudian ada juga smuggling, kemudian ada terorisme juga, kemudian beberapa juga terkait dengan human trafficking dan juga smuggling. Kita punya cerita terkait dengan cash benzina ya, di mana di dalamnya juga terdapat para pekerja-pekerja yang kerja paksa, kerja gelap gitu seperti itu. Kemudian ada juga kejahatan-kejahatan environmental lain ya, termasuk illegal wildlife trade, perdagangan satwa liar yang dilindungi, termasuk juga tax crime. Ini kami ambil dari UNODC crypto untuk menjelaskan, karena tadi banyak cerita tentang environmental corruption. Jadi kita dudukkan dulu posisinya ya, environmental crime sebagai sebuah tindak pidana asal yang juga menghasilkan hasil kejahatan yang kemudian bisa dicuci, disamarkan dengan berbagai upaya pencucian uang sehingga seolah-olah tampak berasal dari sumber yang sah. Next slide. Berdasarkan Undang-Undang 8 2010, kita juga sudah menyatakan beberapa kejahatan di bidang kehutanan, lingkungan hidup, dan juga kelautan dan perikanan sebagai tindak pidana asal daripada money laundering. Undang-undang di Indonesia terkait dengan pencegahan dan pemberantasan tindak pidana pencucian uang menganut sistem list of crime dan juga threshold ya. Jadi ada beberapa kejahatan yang kita nyatakan sebagai tindak pidana asal money laundering, di mana kejahatan-kejahatan tersebut manakala menghasilkan uang yang kemudian dicuci, disamarkan dengan berbagai tindakan pencucian uang, itu maka juga bisa dituntut melakukan pencucian uang. Termasuk yang terakhir, ini adalah segala kejahatan yang diancam dengan pidana 4 tahun atau lebih. Lanjut, ini tren pencucian uang ya. Next slide please. Ya, jadi ini tipologi pencucian uang terkait dengan pursuit of crime di bidang lingkungan hidup dan kehutanan ya. Di antaranya dengan memanfaatkan jasa keuangan baik formal maupun informal ya untuk menyembunyikan menyamarkan uang hasil kejahatan tersebut. Kemudian kita juga mendeteksi ada upaya-upaya pencucian uang dengan cara commingling, menggabungkan uang hasil kejahatan ya di dalam front companies di perusahaan-perusahaan, melakukan misuse di mana kemudian uang hasil kejahatan itu bercampur dengan aktivitas yang sah. Ini upaya pencucian uang. Kemudian yang ketiga melakukan upaya pencucian uang dengan complex structure ya. Misalnya melibatkan professional money laundering, kemudian trust, dan juga melakukan transfer penyembunyian uang hasil kejahatan di beberapa teritori di luar ya, termasuk di negara-negara tax havens country. Lanjut. Ini sekedar informasi ke para peserta konferensi yang kami hormati. Indonesia, sebagaimana juga negara-negara lain, melakukan penilaian risiko. Ada penilaian risiko nasional dan juga sektoral yang dilakukan. Kegiatan penilaian risiko yang terakhir kita lakukan itu tahun 2021. Dan berdasarkan hasil penilaian risiko menunjukkan bahwa kejahatan di sektor kehutanan, kemudian juga lingkungan hidup, ya berdasarkan hasil penilaian risiko yang dilakukan tahun 2021 ini tingkat risikonya medium ya, kira-kira menengah sekitar 5,19 dan juga 5,12. Lanjut. Nah ini hal yang sangat penting bagi kerja-kerja financial intelligence ya. Bagaimana kami dalam proses kerja-kerja intelijen di bidang keuangan itu bisa melakukan proses analisis dan pemeriksaan yang efektif. Ya, karena itu kita membutuhkan informasi-informasi diantaranya informasi mengenai company legal company dan juga BO serta juga kaitan dengan pekerja ya. Untuk legal company kemudian BO kita sudah punya sistem dan alhamdulillah PPATK selaku Financial Intelligence Center memiliki akses untuk melihat data tersebut. Kemudian kaitan dengan environmental crime juga ya, untuk peran Financial Intelligence Unit kita membutuhkan data-data terkait dengan ekspor, informasi ekspor import barang ya, atau PIB. Ini alhamdulillah kita juga bisa mendapatkan informasi tersebut sekalipun tidak seperti informasi legal company ataupun BO yang bisa secara langsung ya. Untuk yang PIB ini masih tidak langsung. Kemudian kita juga dalam proses analisis dan pemeriksaan memanfaatkan informasi-informasi yang terbuka ya, seperti misalnya internet dan juga telepon record. Kemudian metode-metode pembayaran, kemudian informasi mengenai real estate dan juga aset-aset yang terkait. Kemudian informasi pajak serta informasi mengenai perjalanan orang ya, travel entry. Kita juga punya, alhamdulillah PPATK juga mendapatkan informasi terkait dengan SINKIM ya, sistem informasi keimigrasi terkait dengan lalu lintas orang masuk dan juga keluar teritori Indonesia. Informasi-informasi ini akan sangat berharga bagi PPATK untuk melakukan analisis terkait dengan indikasi TPPU yang berasal dari tindak pidana environmental crime atau lingkungan hidup. Lanjut. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, tadi saya sudah menyampaikan bahwa kita melakukan penilaian risiko. Dalam proses penilaian risiko kita juga melakukan kegiatan pestle analysis. Pestle analysis itu adalah kegiatan di mana kita mengundang pakar atau expert ya, di bidang, salah satu di bidang environmental untuk melihat hasil NRA yang ada. Dan berdasarkan pastel analisis tersebut mengemuka ya, ini berkaitan dengan BO, kita memiliki kesulitan ya untuk bisa mengakses informasi BO yang lebih akurat ya, terutama yang terkait dengan perusahaan di luar ya. Kemudian cooperations ya, kita lihat juga kerjasama antar negara, terutama dalam kaitan dengan MLA itu masih ada kendala ya, terutama untuk kaitan dengan penelusuran aset dan juga pengungkapan money laundering ya dari tindak pidana asal lingkungan hidup. Kemudian foreign affiliated ini juga salah satu catatan dari expert. Kemudian business permit ini kaitan dengan izin-izin yang dikeluarkan oleh otoritas yang berwenang di bidang lingkungan ya. Ya umumnya kita juga melihat ada penyalahgunaan izin-izin yang diberikan, baik itu dalam kaitan dengan luas maupun jumlah ya, dan beberapa diantaranya perizinan-perizinan terkait dengan pemanfaatan sumber daya ya, itu juga banyak yang fake ya, palsu. Kemudian natural resources ini kita juga melihat Indonesia cukup kaya ya dengan sumber daya minerba, dan kita melihat juga banyak penyalahgunaan di situ ya. Ini yang dicatat dalam konteks NRA untuk fokus environmental factor. Kemudian kita beralih ke legislative function. Bisa slide berikutnya. Saya coba percepat, Ibu. Ya, ini yang kita lihat peran parlemen ya, bisa melakukan inisiatif-inisiatif dan juga terlibat dalam proses pembahasan peraturan undang-undangan. Kemudian menetapkan peraturan undang-undangan, termasuk juga ini kaitan dengan binding international agreement ya, artinya melakukan pengesahan ataupun ratifikasi terhadap perjanjian-perjanjian internasional yang memang membutuhkan persetujuan daripada parlemen. Lanjut, ini beberapa fungsi parlemen yang kami lihat dari beberapa sumber ya. Kami melihat parlemen memiliki peranan yang sangat strategis, sangat penting, baik itu terkait dengan control policy making, control policy executing, kemudian pengawasan terkait dengan budget atau control budgeting, kemudian kontrol terkait dengan implementasi anggaran yang sudah ditetapkan, kemudian kontrol ataupun pengawasan terkait dengan kinerja pemerintah ya, di mana PPATK juga diminta secara reguler untuk melaporkan kinerja kepada parlemen, termasuk juga kontrol ataupun pengawasan terkait dengan penunjukan beberapa pejabat yang memang berdasarkan ketentuan itu harus melalui persetujuan DPR. Nah, kaitan dengan legislative measure yang kami lihat, bisa slide berikutnya. Kami lihat setidaknya ada 3 ya, yang 2 yang perlu dilakukan. Pertama, memperkuat aset recovery ya. Ini bisa dalam konteks mempercepat penetapan atau pengesahan peraturan undang-undangan, khususnya rancangan undang-undang tentang perampasan aset terkait dengan tindak pidana bagi PPATK dan juga beberapa instansi. Keberadaan rancangan undang-undang tentang perampasan aset terkait dengan tindak pidana atau yang memperkenalkan non-conviction based asset forfeiture ini sangat penting ya, di mana memang kadangkala yang ketemu itu memang hanya asetnya. Kalau selalu dikaitkan dengan pemidanaan, kita akan kesulitan untuk bisa memulihkan aset yang ada. Kemudian beberapa legal inisiatif yang juga bisa dilakukan yang kami lihat ya. Kami melihat ada beberapa kelemahan di beberapa peraturan perundang-undangan dan kita melihat bahwa DPR bisa melakukan inisiatif karena di Indonesia khususnya ya kekuasaan untuk membentuk undang-undang itu ada di DPR salah satunya, sehingga inisiatif-inisiatif bisa dilakukan terutama untuk melakukan pembenahan legislasi, di antaranya misalnya ya untuk mendorong agar pengungkapan tindak pidana di bidang lingkungan hidup itu juga melalui pendekatan financial investigation. Kemudian mendorong multi-door approach misalnya ya. Nah ini sangat penting di mana kejahatan-kejahatan lingkungan hidup itu memang sebaiknya ditangani secara menyeluruh ya dengan pendekatan multi-door sehingga bisa lebih optimal. Kemudian kaitan dengan parliamentary collaboration ya, yang bisa dilakukan pertama kaitan dengan policy making, ini pengawasan. Bagaimana tadi sudah kami sebutkan, saya kira kami kira DPR dalam konteks pengawasan ini bisa melihat kinerja dari seluruh lembaga kementerian yang terkait dengan pelaksanaan performance-nya. Mudah-mudahan proses yang dilakukan ini juga bisa memastikan ya policy making yang dibuat itu berlangsung dengan fair ya, tidak corrupt dan juga mendukung interest daripada masyarakat. Kemudian policy executing, saya kira ini juga sangat penting kaitan dengan pengenaan sanksi ya. Di beberapa case kami melihat memang saat ini sanksi-sanksi yang banyak dikenakan sifatnya administratif. Padahal beberapa yang terjadi itu sudah melibatkan ataupun menghasilkan proceed of crime yang besar, sehingga memang sangat penting untuk memastikan ada penanganan yang lebih keras ya, termasuk memidanakan. Dan alhamdulillah saat ini seluruh penyidik tindak pidana asal, termasuk penyidik kehutanan, lingkungan hidup, kelautan, yaitu sudah memiliki kewenangan untuk melakukan penyidikan tindak pidana pencucian uang. Saya kira di beberapa negara juga seperti itu ya. Karena itu kita mendorong agar penerapan sanksi pidana ya yang lebih optimal, termasuk dengan tersangkakan ya ataupun menuntut dengan sangkaan ataupun dakwaan TPPU itu perlu terus didorong. Kemudian yang terakhir ini government performance ya. Ini juga penting termasuk kaitan dengan upaya-upaya penindakan yang perlu dilakukan agar penanganan tindak pidana lingkungan hidup itu bisa lebih optimal. PPATK menempatkan green financial crime sebagai salah satu prioritas dan ini diharapkan juga bisa mendukung program Bapak Presiden untuk mewujudkan green economy. Demikian mungkin yang dapat saya sampaikan. Terima kasih. Saya kembalikan ke Ibu Moderator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitriadi, for that presentation. We can agree that green corruption, including money laundering, in the field, green corruption includes money laundering, and this occurs in several different fields, whether it be in the forestry sector, environmental, maritime, as well as fisheries sector, and that was highlighted very well in your presentation. And these types of environmental crimes have also been detected, as you mentioned earlier, using several means, whether it be coming from the internet or telephone resources, as well as payment records and information on asset ownerships and etc. So these are the kinds of components that you've spoken about, and I think we all need to be more aware in which corruption or green corruption can occur within these different sectors. We understand that environmental crimes is a main criminal act, that can lead to other forms of criminal action. So there is a negative multiplier effect that comes with this process. And the government, particularly the parliament, has a huge role, whether it be in policy, whether it be in preventing as well as eradicating these kinds of crimes when we incorporate collaboration through oversight, through policy execution. And in the fields of oversight, I think it's everybody's role present here today. And I think this is a reminder for everybody that we have a very crucial role to play in making sure that green corruption does not occur in the future. And of course, this has proven to be quite challenging, but thank you, Bapak, for giving us a lot of insight on how we can mitigate this in the future. Now we would like to turn to our last speaker, Mr. Juhani Grossman, who have actually just submitted a video presentation. So we'll be listening to some of the insights that he has in store for us. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this year's SEAPAC GOPAC conference. I'm particularly pleased about the title and the topic of this panel because this is a topic that we've been discussing at the Basel Institute on Governance for the last 2.5 years. And we use the term green corruption to highlight the intersection between natural resource usage, environmental conservation, and corruption. The term, we selected it over a long period of deliberation because we feel that it highlights the fact that the unsustainable exploitation of our natural resource is frequently enabled through corruption. We are looking at behavioral patterns of the environmental criminals that are similar to those in organized crime, not of criminals of opportunities like poachers or unlicensed miners or farmers felling a tree for their own stove to cook their food. These organized environmental criminals actively utilize corruption to undermine conservation efforts by government, stifle law enforcement responses, weaken the organizational infrastructure of natural resource management agencies. This is one of the major reasons why our conservation goals worldwide are not being achieved. We have found through our research that the anti-corruption tools in the environmental sector tend to be weaker than the rest of government. On one side, the law enforcement tools related to conservation are simply not fit for purpose. These law enforcement tools tend to focus on crimes related to possession or movement of the natural resources, from which the leaders of environmental syndicates are typically several steps removed. Law enforcement is unable to follow the money, which is a crucial prerequisite to address organized environmental crime. We have significant efforts around the world to work with law enforcement, particularly focused on natural resource efforts, and have started such efforts in Indonesia as well. On the prevention side, preventing environmental corruption, we see that the internal controls in natural resource agencies are particularly weak, weaker even than what we've seen in other agencies. And there are many reasons for this. But one comes from the fact that natural resource agencies rarely receive significant budget allocations, meaning they are considered low risk. Small amount of state budget means low risk in terms of building internal controls. And that, of course, highlights the fact that we as societies undervalue the environment. And because we do so through budgeting, we're essentially making the environment suffer twice. First, because it doesn't receive enough money for conservation, and second, because we're not building the controls required to actually make the limited conservation efforts in place be effective. Accordingly, we should not be surprised that there is lots of corruption in the natural resource sector. And while the response clearly has to be one that involves all of society, parliaments have a very special role to play here. First, parliaments need to strengthen their own guardrails and their own controls. It's no secret that there have been corruption scandals inside parliaments themselves related to natural resource budget allocation, licensing, and privatization. Second, parliaments need to adequately fund natural resource agencies during their budgeting discussions, and they need to insist that a sufficient share of the budgets is focused on internal strengthening the functioning of the internal control bodies. Third, ensuring that accountability bodies like specialized anti-corruption courts, supreme audit agencies, and anti-corruption agencies have a mandate, funding, and expertise to prioritize natural resource governance and corruption. Fourth, state-owned enterprises play a very significant role in natural resource exploitation, and unfortunately are also commonly prone to corruption. So, strengthening their governance can have a disproportionate impact on reducing green corruption. This can include the strengthening of compliance officer equivalents like SPE in Indonesia, and of course also the role of independent oversight boards. Fifth and final, renewables. Renewable energy is a growth industry, both because of decarbonization and the destabilization of the energy markets as a result of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Prices for manufacturing capacity, engineering skills, and the rare earths and other renewable supply chain elements are skyrocketing, while governance in the sector remains weak. Parliaments can ensure that they themselves understand the intricacies of this sector and are able to provide adequate policy, guidance, and oversight as the sector is emerging, and of course provide sufficient resources for natural resource agencies and law enforcement to be able to adequately address these new risks. I thank you for your attention, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions you might have during the question and answer section. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johanny Grossman, for that, for the presentation that you have conveyed to us. You again have touched on the importance of and have emphasized on the role of parliamentarians in eradicating corruption in general terms, how we should also strengthen governance and have placed an immense focus as well at the end with regards to renewables, how this not only creates a paved way towards achieving a sustainable future, particularly in the, not eradication, sorry, but the minimization of greenhouse gas emissions, but also opens the doors to the potential of corruption happening. So this is a double-edged sword, and I do hope that we find active solutions in the future and ensure that this does not happen, because right now in Commission 7 we're working on this bill on renewable energy. We're very much very in support of the renewable energy space. So thank you very much to all speakers. They have all the speakers today, all our incredible panelists today have triggered us to think more critically about the issues that we are currently discussing. And as for now, I'd like to open the floor for further discussions and questions. And I'd like to invite our fellow members of parliament in Southeast Asia to share some thoughts and insights on the discussions that have occurred earlier. And particularly, firstly, I'd like to convey the floor to Ibu Sylvia. Ibu Sylvia is a senator from the DKI Jakarta region, and she is also the head of the Inter-Parliamentary Cooperation at the senator level. So we have Ibu Sylvia, whereas Bapak Fadlizon is the chair of the Inter-Parliamentary Cooperation within the parliament. So there's the parliament, there's also the senator level. So Ibu Sylvia, I know you are running out of time, but now I'd like to extend the floor to you, and please, this floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang terhormat Presiden SEAPAC dan Wakil Ketua GOPEC, Ketua Badan Kerjasama Antar Parlemen DPR RI, Bapak sahabat saya Pak Fadlizon yang luar biasa bersama dengan pimpinan BKSAP lainnya. Yang terhormat Dr. Ali bin Fetais Almari, Ketua Badan Eksekutif GOPEC, para narasumber yang saya hormati, serta seluruh member. Atas nama Dewan Perwakilan Daerah Republik Indonesia, tadi interpreternya mengatakan DPRD DKI, bukan, Dewan Perwakilan Daerah Republik Indonesia, dapilnya DKI Jakarta, tapi saya atas nama Ketua BKSP DPD RI. Saya ingin menyampaikan penghargaan dan terima kasih atas undangan SEAPAC pada konferensi dan sidang umum SEAPAC yang bertema Parliamentary Actions and Political Finance Oversight and Combating Green Corruption in Southeast Asia. Dan saya juga ingin menyampaikan bahwa ini sangat relevan sekali dengan tugas DPD RI sebagaimana dijelaskan oleh Undang-Undang Dasar kami, antara lain membahas isu-isu terkait dengan pengelolaan sumber daya alam dan sumber daya ekonomi lainnya tentu. Kami berharap lembaga kami dapat berpartisipasi lebih dalam dengan SEAPAC maupun GOPEC agar dapat memberikan pandangan-pandangan serta perspektif pemerintahan dan otonomi daerah. Karena kami berasal bukan dari partai tetapi dari perwakilan daerah di 34 provinsi. Dan di masa yang akan datang, terutama terkait dengan isu corruption dan lingkungan hidup, tentu saja kita harus mengatasi green corruption, yaitu korupsi atau kejahatan keuangan yang menyebabkan kerusakan lingkungan dan keragaman hayati. Nah, DPD RI telah memiliki kelengkapan untuk memantau pemerintahan daerah, manajemen sumber daya alam, akuntabilitas publik, dan pengawasan peraturan daerah. Menurut kami, di antara penyebab corruption atau green corruption ini adalah biaya politik dan kewenangan perizinan. Sumber daya alam berada di berbagai provinsi sehingga dapat menjadi sumber korupsi apabila tidak disiapkan perangkat-perangkat pencegahan pada level legislasi, kemudian regulasi, dan tentu saja operasionalnya. Sumber daya alam perlu dikelola dengan baik untuk kepentingan rakyat dan daerah tersebut. Namun apabila korupsi semakin merajalela, apalagi menggerogoti efisiensi dan efektivitas pengelolaan sumber daya alam berkelanjutan, maka sebuah negara atau wilayah politik akan terjebak dalam fenomena natural resources curse atau kutukan sumber alam. Cirinya antara lain kelimpahan sumber daya alam tidak bermanfaat pada kemakmuran dan kesejahteraan masyarakat. Dan parlemen dapat mencegah situasi ini melalui legislasi dan pengawasan kebijakan otonomi daerah. Lembaga kami telah melakukan berbagai inisiatif untuk mengawasi kebijakan otonomi di daerah, bahkan di seluruh wilayah di Indonesia, serta pengaturan perimbangan keuangan antara pusat dan daerah. Pada intinya, jangan ada kebocoran. Sekali lagi, jangan ada kebocoran dan penyalahgunaan kewenangan dari berbagai pihak dalam mengelola sumber daya alam agar dapat terus dinikmati generasi mendatang. Dan parlemen juga harus menutupi celah-celah hukum bagi politisi untuk melakukan eksploitasi sumber daya alam bagi kepentingan politik pribadi mereka dan mendorong penegak hukum untuk melakukan pengawasan atau penyelidikan terhadap pengelolaan sumber daya alam di tiap-tiap provinsi di seluruh Indonesia. Dan kami bersyukur DPD RI sekali lagi memiliki badan akuntabilitas publik, di mana saya juga pernah menjadi ketua BAP tersebut, untuk menerima masukan dan pengaduan masyarakat. Dan ternyata memang banyak sekali masyarakat yang mengadu kepada kami. Demikian juga kami punya panitia kerja di mana kita bagi menjadi 4, yaitu otonomi daerah di komite 1, sumber daya alam komite 2, serta keuangan dan pajak komite 4, di mana komite 3-nya juga masalah pendidikan dan lain sebagainya. Nah, keempat komite ini bekerja untuk memastikan pemerintah pusat dan pemerintah daerah dapat betul-betul mengelola sumber daya alamnya dengan baik dan berkelanjutan. Sekali lagi harus berkelanjutan. Serta berkala para anggota DPD RI melakukan pengawasan langsung ke wilayah masing-masing. Sehingga terjadi keseimbangan antara memacu pertumbuhan ekonomi yang tinggi di daerah dan pembangunan berkelanjutan. Tentu saja selain melakukan pengawasan terhadap institusi politik dan pemerintah, negara juga perlu melakukan pencegahan korupsi di pihak swasta. Saya garis bawahi di pihak swasta, yaitu dengan menegakkan tata kelola perusahaan yang bersih sehingga melindungi mereka dari tekanan-tekanan politik dalam perizinan dan penyelenggaraan investasi maupun penegakan aturan-aturan penyelenggaraan investasi yang pro perlindungan lingkungan hidup. Demikian pendapat dari kami, dan saya perkenalkan juga di sebelah saya adalah Dr. Ali Ridho, adalah salah satu dari anggota, juga pernah menjadi pimpinan di BKSP, DPD RI, Dapilnya Banten. Terima kasih sekali lagi untuk pimpinan BKSAP, DPD RI, DPR RI yang luar biasa memberikan kesempatan kepada DPD RI. Terima kasih banyak, dan terima kasih untuk Ibu Moderator yang cantik and smart. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Bu Sylvia. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you for those insights as well. So now I'd like to share the floor to our members of parliament, our colleagues from Malaysia. So you have the first floor. Please.
Thank you to Madam Moderator. I'll start by giving some comments and then some questions that need enlightenment from the fellow speakers. First, I think we all acknowledge that the current laws and regulations to combat green corruption may not be sufficient and strong enough. That requires the Parliament and the capacity building at the government level to improve that drastically. I think in face of the rapidly changing technology and the threats of climate change, as well as the needs for decarbonization, the situation is getting more milky and sophisticated, especially for developing countries. Another thing is about fund. To tackle green corruption, you must give enforcement agencies and other relevant authorities with appropriate resources, stronger jurisdiction and capacity. However, it is also challenging for us to ensure they always have adequate enforcement equipments and the capacity to monitor the situation. I would also like to ask fellow speakers on the idea of ecological fiscal transfer, because as the madam just now mentioned, usually the areas that require the most protection would be relatively less developed area. In that case, however, they are lacking capacity. So in Malaysia, we do have ecological fiscal transfer. Indeed, this year we are increasing the amount from 70 million ringgit to 150 million, which is a one-time double-fold increase. And it's also based on the forested land areas, the tiger habitats, because we love our harimau, Malayan tiger, and the replanting efforts. So I'm not sure your comment about this. Second question is about whistleblowing. Do you think giving rewards to whistleblowers is a good idea? Because we are facing enormous challenge with enforcement, and usually it happens on a willing taker, willing giver basis. So what would be the incentive for the whistleblowers to step up, facing all these pressures, to step forward and to expose the situation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member of Parliament from Malaysia. There are a couple of points there, so I'd like to maybe just remind everybody and all of our speakers, we will be taking all the questions first. So you can take note of all the questions from all the members of Parliament, and then we will answer it at the end. That's okay with all the speakers. So the MP Honorable Member of Parliament from Malaysia have asked a couple of things, including in relation to the ecological fiscal transfer, which has been implemented in Malaysia, as well as whistleblowing. So your takes on these topics will be very much appreciated. So thank you very much, Honorable MP from Malaysia. Next, I'd like to extend the floor to Honorable MP from Thailand.
ท่านประธานผู้ดำเนินรายการครับในส่วนของธุรกิจสีเขียวเนี่ยเป็นปัญหาที่อันตรายและความซับซ้อนที่สุดปัญหาหนึ่งในปัจจุบันเนื่องจากการทุจริตเนี่ยไม่เพียงคุกคามสิ่งแวดล้อมและความหลากหลายทางชีวภาพเท่านั้นนะครับแต่ยังเป็นภัยคุกคามต่อธรรมาภิบาลและความมั่นคงของมนุษย์อีกด้วยหลายประเทศที่มีทรัพยากรมากรวมทั้งประเทศในเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้ของเราอาจเป็นเป้าหมายในการก่ออาชญากรรมต่อสิ่งแวดล้อมซึ่งปัญหานี้อาจทำให้สิ่งแวดล้อมมีความเสื่อมโทรมมากยิ่งขึ้นผมขอยกตัวอย่างเช่นการผลิตขยะและการกำจัดขยะรวมถึงกระบวนการของการที่นำขยะเอามาใช้ใหม่และก็ใช้ไม่ถูกวิธีโดยมีการอนุมัติโรงงานผลิตขยะที่ไม่ถูกต้องและจำกัดไม่ถูกต้องเป็นการทำลายสิ่งแวดล้อมและเป็นการทุจริตอันหนึ่งหรือการที่ประเทศหนึ่งซึ่งเป็นประเทศที่พัฒนาแล้วนำส่งขยะเข้ามาทิ้งในอีกหลายประเทศในเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้ประเด็นเหล่านี้เป็นประเด็นที่สำคัญและล่อแหลมและก็ไม่ค่อยมีการบังคับใช้ในกฎหมายระหว่างประเทศใดเลยในการห้ามประเทศหนึ่งนำขยะมาทิ้งในประเทศหนึ่งประเด็นของการก่อสร้างลุกล้ำในทรัพยากรธรรมชาติการอนุมัติเช่น EIA นะครับอนุมัติเป็นการลุกล้ำทรัพยากรธรรมชาติการก่อสร้างโดยใบอนุญาตที่ไม่ถูกต้องไม่ตรวจสอบสิ่งแวดล้อมอย่างจริงจังก็เป็นการทุจริตสีเขียวเหมือนกันทำให้สิ่งแวดล้อมนั้นถูกทำลายการอุตสาหกรรมต่างๆที่ผลิตกระตุ้นให้ผลิตมากในระบบทุนนิยมเสร็จแล้วก็ส่งผลเสียออกมาไม่ว่าเป็นทางน้ำทางอากาศฝุ่นละอองหรือในส่วนของทางเสียงที่ออกมาสู่หัวสภาพของคนโดยการอนุมัติของรัฐที่ทุจริตนะครับแล้วก็ทำให้ประชาชนต้องรับผลกระทบแบบนี้และเสียหายต่อสิ่งแวดล้อมรวมถึงในส่วนของการใช้ทรัพยากรทางทะเลนะครับที่มีการใช้อย่างไม่ถูกต้องใช้แรงงานที่มีการใช้แรงงานที่กดขี่แรงงานและนำผลผลิตทางทะเลเข้าไปเรื่องนี้ทางประเทศไทยก็ได้มีการออกกฎหมายในยุคหนึ่งซึ่งไม่ใช่ยุคที่มีการเลือกตั้งแต่กฎหมายนั้นเข้มแข็งไปหน่อยนะครับโดยทำให้ประมงของประเทศไทยนั้นก็สูญหายไปจากระบบค่อนข้างเยอะเมื่อสัปดาห์ที่แล้วรัฐสภาไทยเนี่ยนะครับโดยสภาผู้แทนราษฎรก็ได้มีผ่านกฎหมายแก้ไขพระราชบัญญัติประมงนะครับเพื่อที่จะจัดความสมดุลระหว่างการรักษาสิ่งแวดล้อมกับให้อาชีพประมงไม่ว่าประมงทางเศรษฐกิจทางธุรกิจหรือประมงพื้นบ้านได้อยู่ได้อย่างสองอย่างนี่คือสิ่งที่รัฐสภาไทยเราได้ทำขึ้นมานี่คือสิ่งที่ทำในทางสิ่งแวดล้อมนะครับขอเรียนว่าในส่วนประเทศไทยนั้นเรามีแผนพัฒนาทางเศรษฐกิจสังคมแห่งชาติฉบับล่าสุดคือปีพ.ศ. 2566 ถึง 2570 ที่ได้รับอนุมัติแล้วนะครับซึ่งแผนดังกล่าวเป็นแผนพัฒนาชาติฉบับที่ 13 ที่รวมประเด็นสิ่งแวดล้อมพัฒนาที่ยั่งยืนโดยมีแนวคิดเป้าหมายการพัฒนาที่ยั่งยืนของสหประชาชาติและเศรษฐกิจชีวภาพเศรษฐกิจหมุนเวียนเศรษฐกิจสีเขียวหรือที่เรียกโมเดลทางเศรษฐกิจว่า BCG ประเทศไทยได้นำโมเดลเศรษฐกิจ BCG มาใช้เป็นยุทธศาสตร์ในการพัฒนาเศรษฐกิจของประเทศและส่งเสริมหลักปฏิบัติ ESG ประทานโทษสำหรับธุรกิจเพื่อบรรลุเป้าหมายแนวเศรษฐกิจนะครับการปกป้องสิ่งแวดล้อมและผลกระทบธรรมาภิบาลสังคมและต่อต้านทุจริตมีความเท่าเทียมและยังคงมีความสำคัญสูงสุดสำหรับประเทศไทยในการเร่งการเติบโตเศรษฐกิจเราเห็นว่าการเติบโตเศรษฐกิจกับการรักษาความสมดุลของสิ่งแวดล้อมมันต้องไปด้วยกันมันไม่ใช่เติบโตอย่างเดียวแล้วทำลายสิ่งแวดล้อมและคนต้องมาผจญและคนกลุ่มหนึ่งที่อนุมัติมีความทุจริตนั้นก็มีความร่ำรวยขึ้นกับสิ่งนี้แต่ทำลายโลกทำลายมนุษย์ด้านความร่วมมือระหว่างประเทศไทยได้ความมั่นว่าจะมุ่งสู่ความเป็นกลางทางคาร์บอนภายในปีพ.ศ. 2593การปล่อยก๊าซเรือนกระจกสุทธิเป็นศูนย์ภายในปีพ.ศ. 2608นะครับ2608ในการประชุมรัฐภาคีกรอบอนุสัญญาสหประชาชาติว่าด้วยการแลกเปลี่ยนสภาพภูมิอากาศสมัยที่26และสมัยที่27ประเทศไทยสนับสนุนการจัดตั้งกองทุนชดเชยสูญเสียและเสียหายที่เริ่มโดยการประชุมรัฐภาคีสมัยที่27เพื่อช่วยเหลือกลุ่มประเทศที่มีความเปราะบางได้รับผลกระทบมากที่สุดจากวิกฤตสภาพภูมิอากาศเราซึ่งเป็นสมาชิกรัฐสภามุ่งมั่นที่ติดตามการบริหารจัดการกองทุนดังกล่าวและสร้างระบบที่มีการตรวจสอบมีความโปร่งใสและครอบคลุมมีส่วนได้เสียเพื่อให้มั่นใจว่าโครงสร้างการปฏิบัติตามกฎระเบียบและติดตามผลกระทบปล่อยก๊าซเรือนกระจกสุทธิเป็นศูนย์ที่มีต่อประชาชนในแง่กฎหมายประเทศไทยมีกฎหมายต่อต้านการติดสินบนและต่อต้านทุจริตและมีผลบังคับใช้มานานหลายทศวรรษโดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งกฎหมายที่เน้นอาชญากรรมที่เกี่ยวข้องกับการค้าสัตว์ป่ากฎหมายเหล่านี้ยังคงมีผลบังคับใช้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพและในส่วนของคณะกรรมาธิการปปช.สภาผู้แทนราษฎรเราได้มีการลงไปตรวจสอบจับกุมชี้เบาะแสจับกุมดำเนินการผู้ที่ตัดไม้ทำลายป่าโดยผู้แทนเราในกรรมาธิการเรา2ท่านเนี่ยก็ลงพื้นที่ได้จัดการสิ่งเหล่านี้มากมายนั่นคือกระบวนการหนึ่งในสภาของไทยนะครับแต่การตัดไม้สวมตอนะครับที่อีกหนึ่งเราก็ทำในส่วนนี้นี่คือในทางปฏิบัติที่เราทำอยู่นะครับ ในเรื่องของการรับสินบนนะครับเรามีกฎหมายฟอกเงินเรามีกฎหมายปราบปรามทุจริตแต่อย่างที่ผมเรียนในเมื่อการอภิปรายในหัวข้อที่แล้วมันติดเรื่องโครงสร้างประชาธิปไตยของประเทศเราต้องไปแก้ในส่วนนั้นด้วยเพื่อจะให้มีการตรวจสอบและเปิดเผยข้อมูลในทุกข้อมูลที่จะให้มีการตรวจสอบเป็นรัฐโปร่งใสอย่างแท้จริงจะมีประสิทธิภาพในการบังคับใช้กฎหมายในตัวกฎหมายเรามีพร้อมแต่การใช้กฎหมายเราต้องอาศัยในส่วนของโครงสร้างที่เป็นประชาธิปไตยด้วยในขั้นตอนการจัดสรรงบประมาณนะครับมันมีกระบวนการของการทุจริตสีเขียวก็เกิดขึ้นอยู่เหมือนกันนั่นก็คือว่ามีการเสนอของกลุ่มคนที่ต้องการที่จะขออนุมัติขออะไรขึ้นมาในการจัดสรรงบประมาณในที่ไม่ชอบธรรมในขั้นตอนนี้กระบวนการตรวจสอบของรัฐสภาไทยก็มีความเข้มข้นขึ้นโดยพรรคฝ่ายค้านก็ได้มีการตรวจสอบลงรายละเอียดอย่างไม่เคยมีมาก่อนในทุกองค์ประกอบซึ่งขณะนี้เราได้ดำเนินการคิดว่าน่าจะปรับปรุงขึ้นในส่วนของประเทศไทยแล้วก็เราคิดว่าเราพร้อมที่จะทำงานร่วมกับองค์กรระหว่างประเทศเพื่อยับยั้งอาชญากรทางสิ่งแวดล้อมข้ามชาตินะครับความร่วมมือของเราในการต่อสู้การทุจริตปกป้องสิ่งแวดล้อมและการเสริมสร้างธรรมาภิบาลจะเป็นการออกทางออกในการหยุดทุจริตสีเขียวการไหลเวียนของเงินที่ผิดกฎหมายจากอาชญากรรมสิ่งแวดล้อมผลประโยชน์จากบุคคลแสวงประโยชน์ในโลกของเราประเทศไทยพยายามที่จะแก้ไขปัญหาทุจริตสีเขียวต่อไปและพร้อมทำงานอย่างใกล้ชิดกับประเทศสมาชิก SEAPAC เพื่อต่อต้านการกระทำผิดกฎหมายและเราในฐานะสมาชิกรัฐสภาต้องปฏิบัติหน้าที่มีบทบาททางกฎหมายอย่างมีประสิทธิภาพและใช้ความพยายามไม่อยากเหน็ดเหนื่อยเพื่อปกป้องโลกของเราจากอาชญากรรมสิ่งแวดล้อมในส่วนคณะกรรมการการฟอกเงินของประเทศไทยนั้นเราก็มีกระบวนการมีโปรแกรมมีระบบที่ในการตรวจสอบนะครับการฟอกเงินของการปกติซึ่งรวมของทุจริตสีเขียวหรือทุจริตอื่นด้วยซึ่งตรงนี้นะครับถ้าเกิดว่าในองค์กร SEAPAC หรือ GoPac ถ้าเราร่วมมือกันในการตรวจสอบการฟอกเงินผมเชื่อว่าสิ่งเหล่านี้จะทำให้ภูมิภาคเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้นั้นเข้มแข็งขึ้นในการปราบปรามทุจริตทุกประเภทและคิดว่า การที่ผมและคณะของทีมประเทศไทยซึ่งเรามีทั้งฝ่ายค้านรัฐบาลมาร่วมประชุมครั้งนี้ก็ถือว่าเป็นเกียรตินะครับที่มาร่วมกันและคิดว่าในอนาคตเราคงได้ทำในสิ่งที่เข้มข้นและตรงประเด็นมากยิ่งขึ้นในการร่วมกันปราบปรามทุจริตไม่ว่าทั้งสีเขียวและธุรกิจอื่นๆด้วยครับขอบคุณครับ
Thank you very much, Honorable Member of Parliament from Thailand. Very insightful, and you did mention about the lack of inspection that I think a lot of our panelists can comment on as well, and also how the contribution of industries, amongst others, yeah, because you highlighted a lot of issues, but I think one of the most important is also how we deal with environmental nuisances, which corresponds to certain industries, which then, there is an impact on the waste, pollution that is also may arise in certain industries and how that impacts societies. I think this is very interesting. So I'd like to hear the comments of our panelists on this particular issue as well. So thank you, Honorable MP. Now I'd like to extend the floor to Honorable Member of Parliament from Timor-Leste. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Honorable MP Dr. Fadlizon, Senator Sylvia, she has left, Honorable Member of Parliament, distinguished speakers, panelists, moderators, and distinguished guests. Allow me to share some of experience that Timor-Leste has regarding on the issue of social participation and open parliament. In Timor-Leste, since 2015, we have started on implementing the open participation on social society through the MOU that signed between the NGOs Forum and the government. It's about the social audit. So the social participation we do through the social audit. The reason why the Timor-Leste implementing the participation on social society through the social audit based on two reasons. First, it's stated on the Timor-Leste's constitution. We have a section that first, for the right for the citizen responsibility and the rights, it's stated on section 40, 48, and 63. As for the state's responsibility, it's stated on section 73, 108, number 1 and 2, section 129, section 137, and section 149. Beside from that, there's an important reason as well why that we choose to do this social audit. The fundamental reason for the citizens to be more actively doing the social audit is through three reasons that stated on the citizenship participation. First reason is to empower the community participation. The second is for the inclusion. It's the important participation on the vulnerable group like women, youth, and also those who are unable to be more actively in the society. Second is to increase the responsibility on the social for how the government can be implementing their budget execution yearly. The 3 points for the government is very important to guarantee the national development as a citizen. And the second one, it can be used as a political influence, as a way of the government to do a better planning on their budget yearly. And the third one, to be for the government to be more involvement in constructive dialogue between the community and the government. As for the parliamentarian, we adopted the system on the budget participation. Yearly on the discussion on the budget, the presentation on the budget by the government, the parliament usually held a session, open session for the NGOs to be able to also discuss with the parliamentarian about the planning that government presenting to the Parliament through their planning and also through their budget. So this system that we use as a budget participation is very actively participated by all the NGOs in Timor-Leste through, they call in Timor NGO Forum, is a forum with all the NGOs that register in Timor-Leste. They all has one umbrella organization which it calls NGO Forum. So through NGOs Forum, usually they do the active participation with the budget discussion before it goes to the debate on the Parliament. The second one, in the Parliament, we also have this plan, but it's not quite in our program, it's not yet been realized, which we call the People's Voice. The program has one plan of doing the open debate with the society. The planning topics that was being organized by the G Commission, which is the Education, Youth, and the Social Communication Commission, they plan on doing 2 topics for this open debate with the society, which is climate change and the public health policy. But unfortunately, this debate hasn't been done until now because of the COVID situation, and also because of we had recently the president's election. So there hasn't been any opportunity to do this social open debate with the society. And the last one, I want to ask the question to one of our panelists, which is Dr. Rafael Jimenez Ayer, about about the climate, about the corruption interfere with the right under environmental democracy. In Timor-Leste, we have a very big issue regarding on the holding lands that the government do in order to do more development from some public facilities. Example, for the airport construction, there's a case where the government has to giving the refund money or compensation money to the people that has their land that's been used by the government to do the construction of the airport. They paid a very low amount for the compensation money for their land. We consider it very low because it's not as much as the land price in the market. So do you think that this practice is considered as a way of government also doing the corruption, or is it like we can call it like the legal practice by the government in order to be able to hold the lands and take the lands for the people for the public use interest? So I would like to hear some opinion from Mr. Jimenez, or also from the other panelists as well. I think that's all I can say. Thank you, MP, for your time, and thank you very much for everyone's attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Member of Parliament from Timor-Leste, for your questions. You mentioned about social audit as well as budget participation from the public. This is very important and very much in line with the topic of the open parliamentary system, as well as enacting environmental democracy. So I think a lot of our panelists can comment on those 2 issues. So thank you for your both your insights and also your questions. I'd like to finally just extend the floor in case anybody here would like to convey anything else or would like to ask a question. Bapak, yeah, please, the floor is yours. I think this should be the final question, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Laude Muhammad Sharif, and thank you SEAPAC and GOPAC for inviting me. I am a former Commissioner of Corruption Eradication Commissions. I really like the theme of the conference about political finance and combating green corruptions. I just want to comment on a few things. First of all, I think one of the main problem in our country, especially, and not only Indonesia, but I think ASEAN in general, is that political corruptions, it is one of the main problems. For example, because the disclosure of political finance, it is very rare, including Indonesia, and I think this needs to be tackled. And I think the financial intelligence body of Indonesia, PPATK, which is one of the speakers, actually just announced that there is a few suspicious transactions from the green corruption linked to political campaign or political parties. And I don't think this is only the case of Indonesia. When I was in KPK, we actually are focusing our works on green corruption. I work with Basel Institute and even OECD countries, and in several prosecutions by KPK or by Attorney General Office of Indonesia, we can always see the link between big corporations and link to political, or what you call it, PEPs, politically exposed persons. So I think if we are actually serious on this, it will be very good. But I think this is not only for Indonesia, but I think also in ASEAN country, but also not limited to ASEAN, but I mean to all of us. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Laude Sharif, the former Deputy Chair of KPK, which is the Corruption Eradication Commission, for your insights. Again, I'm sure speaking from experience, so those are very insightful for us. So now, lastly, our last session would be for our speakers, our panelists, to answer all of the questions combined. So let's just go in order of the presentation that was presented before. We'll start with Mr. Rodrigo. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moderator. Well, I'd like to focus on the answering the questions of the MP from Timor-Leste about open parliament, and let the other speakers that are to answer the other questions. You spoke about social audit in Constitution, okay, and that's very important because in Argentina we don't have that provision on the Constitution, and I would like to tell you that the lawmaking process has become better, even better, since 2016 in Argentina after these open parliament measures, and many MPs didn't like this procedure, okay, but after they understood how it works, now the number of MPs that are using it is increasing, and the relationship between MPs and NGOs and among MPs and citizens has become better, really better, because of course everybody here works in parliaments or worked in parliaments or study about parliaments, and now that the parliamentarian work is heavy, exigent, but at least in Argentina, population don't think so. Yes, so it's good for MPs, and it's good for the population to know more about the work of the Parliament, and to get involved more and more, and this social audit or social commitment on the parliamentarian work is really important. You also spoke about budget participation. We have that kind of process in the local level. In provinces or in the autonomous city of Buenos Aires, we have a process of budget participation, but it doesn't apply for all the budget. So there is a part of the budget that is dedicated to public works in general, where the population can choose or can prefer some public works to other, generally referred to local places, yes, or local infrastructures, and they can not decide but orient the budgeting for the next year. It's a very good experience. In Argentina, we began to implement that experience, learning from Brazil. In fact, from Porto Alegre, that is the capital of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, they had a very good experience on budget participation, and we took that experience first in cities, in Rosario City, in Buenos Aires City, and after that experience, some provinces began to use it. So I really encourage you to use that democratic institutions. And about the other questions, what I can say, as commodities and natural resources-based economies, Argentina and some other Latin American countries are similar to some of the experience you share here, and well, I came from so far to learn and to understand the situation in this region, and it's very useful for me to hear and share experience with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodrigo. And now we turn to Mr. Rafael, please.
Thank you very much. I hope I will not forget anything of the many things to which I would like to provide a response. Well, first, by direct implication, I would like to respond to the honorary member of parliament from Timor-Leste as to whether this issue of the compensation to landowners for the construction of the airport would have been a case of corruption. Well, I really don't have enough information, but it would appear that this has been at the very least a failure of participation and perhaps of access to justice as well. So I cannot tell you whether there was a case of corruption or not, but I can tell you that with a stronger environmental democracy, perhaps the issue would have played out differently. Then I would like to come to the question of our honorable member of parliament from Malaysia. Well, I am certainly not in a position to recommend whether the issue of incentivizing whistleblowers in Malaysia would be appropriate or not. But again, perhaps more across the region and everywhere, before thinking of providing rewards for whistleblowers anywhere, one would want to check whether the rule of law as regards the protection of environmental defenders is strong enough. So one would need to take stock of the situation of environmental whistleblowers more generally and see to try to address their circumstances more holistically. Because perhaps people are not going to risk their lives for a certain sum of money if they don't feel safe. Which brings me to, again, being very pleased to see that SEAPAC chose the the issue of green corruption, which seems to be clearly very relevant when we talk about corruption in general in the region. And I couldn't encourage you passionately enough to look into the possibility of developing a regional environmental democracy agreement to address this ecosystem that enables corruption and to create a virtuous circle across the region to try to improve the situation, learning from each other and also from other experiences across the world, as we've seen. But I do realize that green, it sounds, I mean, it's very encompassing, it's a good name, but it's a bit vague at the same time. And anyway, green issues, even if you're not experts on environmental governance in general, they are, even for an environmentally aware or activist parliamentarian, there are many areas of the green agenda that would fall beyond their field of expertise. So I would encourage all of you to talk to your colleagues that are leading on environmental issues, various environmental issues, because they will probably also need you and your expertise as champions against corruption to work out well, how to do things better. And this session has provided you with a number of checklists of a toolbox of how to combat green corruption. And I would simply like to use the opportunity to flag up a couple of important topics that are coming up in the global environmental governance landscape. The first one is, as many of you will remember, last December we got a new global framework on biodiversity, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which has a number of very interesting and relevant provisions, including as regards issues that could be very directly linked to environmental democracy and indeed combating green corruption. So parliaments across the world are likely to be busy in the coming months working out what this new framework means at local level, because probably legislation will need to be realigned with these new objectives. So this is a concrete entry point that each of you could take home and start looking into in contact and in cooperation with your colleagues that are sitting in the environment committees, perhaps. And the second one is that at next UNFCCC COP in the Gulf, COP28, we will complete the process of the first global stocktake. That first global stocktake is provided by in the Paris Agreement, and it's going to be the first time that all the parties are going to sit together and are going to receive the report of experts and the UNFCCC Secretariat that have been sifting through all the national NDCs that were tabled 5 years ago or less in cases, and seeing how they're being implemented. So it's going to be the first time that the global community is going to have a snapshot of how is implementation doing. So this is going to provide an opportunity for parliaments around the world to check what is going wrong with the delivery of national climate commitments. And there will be plenty of opportunities for identifying mispractices and things that need to be strengthened at local level in the context of climate governance. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rafael. That concludes that there will be further discussions, of course, on this field in future engagements. So we're very much looking forward to that. And lastly, Mr. Fitriadi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Izinkan saya menanggapi dua hal. Yang pertama dari Malaysia terkait dengan whistleblowing. Ini sangat penting sekali. Dan sependapat dengan Pak Rafael, kita harus memastikan setiap orang bisa terlibat, berpartisipasi, termasuk juga melaporkan apabila ada hal-hal yang perlu dilaporkan. Dan saya kira tidak hanya membangun sistem yang memastikan society, masyarakat itu atau mereka yang terlibat dalam isu-isu lingkungan itu bisa melaporkan berbagai hal yang memang perlu didalami oleh otoritas, tapi yang juga tidak kalah penting adalah memastikan mereka nyaman dan juga memiliki pemahaman mengenai laporan yang disampaikan. Saya ingin menyampaikan sedikit pengalaman di PPATK. Kami juga membangun whistleblowing system, kemudian berusaha meningkatkan kapasitas mereka yang bergerak di isu-isu lingkungan. bahkan memberikan pelatihan-pelatihan untuk memastikan informasi-informasi apa saja yang sangat penting ya untuk kemudian masuk dalam laporan mereka sehingga bisa kita tindak lanjuti. Kemudian membangun mekanisme yang melindungi mereka terkait dengan laporan yang disampaikan, termasuk juga kita terlibat menandatangani MOU atau kesepakatan dengan civil society terkait dengan laporan-laporan atau peran serta mereka dalam pencegahan money laundering di bidang lingkungan hidup. Jadi ini sangat penting membangun whistleblowing system. Kemudian yang kedua terkait dengan Timur Leste ya, social participation, kemudian social audit, saya kira ini sangat baik. Tapi kami melihat ini masih dua arah ya, tidak kolaboratif. PPATK juga belajar dari pengalaman di beberapa negara. Kita juga kemudian membangun yang dinamakan dengan public-private partnership, kolaborasi bersama sektor public dan private ya, untuk membahas isu-isu yang penting ya. Kita membuat dari public-private partnership misalnya alert system ya. Apa namanya kita sebut itu semacam informasi awal yang bisa dipedomani oleh bank dan juga semua ya, yang itu didevelop dari diskusi yang dilakukan secara mendalam. Ya misalnya terkait dengan operational alert untuk tindak pidana narkotika. Kita saling berbagi pengalaman yang ada di private, kemudian yang ada di penegak hukum, termasuk di otoritas seperti misalnya PPATK dan OJK, kemudian merumuskan dalam suatu operational alert sehingga memungkinkan mereka bisa mendeteksi transaksi-transaksi terkait dengan narkotika. Nah, kita juga dalam waktu dekat akan berdiskusi bersama ya dalam konteks public-private partnership untuk membangun atau menyusun operational alert terkait dengan transaksi terkait dengan environmental crime ya, ataupun money laundering terkait dengan pendanaan tindak pidana di lingkungan hidup. Itu yang penting. Jadi semua berkolaborasi, memberikan masukan dan semua bisa juga memantau peran kerja masing-masing. Apa yang dilakukan oleh private sector, kemudian oleh otoritas, kemudian oleh penegak hukum, semua berkolaborasi sehingga hasilnya bisa lebih optimal. Saya kira praktek best practice ya, ini akan lebih cair, ya, lebih kolaboratif. Demikian pengalaman kami. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Mr. Fitriadi, for those for answering those questions. And of course, I'd like to extend my thank you also to the fellow panelists. So if we could quickly summarize on today's discussion, we could all agree that green corruption is a very urgent challenge that needs to be handled in a collective manner, as we understand that this is very complex in nature and has multiple challenges and can cause multiple damages. So again, cross-sectoral participation is very much key in solving this issue. Secondly, when we speak of the parliamentary participation and as well as initiatives, there are several steps that we can make. I think we are gifted with this ability to create change and to participate in changes. So firstly, how we can ensure the transparency on data, budgeting and reports on environmental agendas. I think that that's something that we can work on. And secondly, we understand that citizen participation is very much crucial. We spoke about open parliament system, we spoke about environmental democracy, and all the components that lead up in really just enacting environmental democracy generally. And I think this is something that we need to take more into consideration, the opinions of the public, not only citizens in general, but again, opening our hearts to society, to civil society organizations, to those who have experts in this field, whether it be the academia as well. I think this is very important for that cross-cutting collaboration. So we can increase awareness on this issue. We live in a modernized world where technology is very much can be used as a tool to disseminate information and socialization on how we can eradicate this problem. Next, a control mechanism that oversees multi aspects, including the lawmaking process, implementation of the law in itself, business concessions that that is very much cross-cutting with environment and people's involvement. So that's also something we need to take into account of. And lastly, the need of accountability body to make sure that there is compliance with the rule of law and executing environmental justice. So this is something that, again, is one of our responsibilities in carrying out our oversight system within the parliament, whether it be in Indonesia and all countries alike, because this is, again, cross-cutting across nations. And again, through the spirit of gotong royong, I always say this because gotong royong means collectively working together side by side and creating a solution and creating the most optimum, result. And this is a saying in Indonesia, and I really encourage all of us to really just work together and learn from each other. I mean, you traveled all the way from Argentina as well to come here to learn. So we're all here traveling from different parts of the world, and I do hope that this is a insightful session for all. So now we are again coming to an end to this session. And unfortunately, we do have to close the session, the second session of the SEAPAC conference entitled the Galvanizing Parliamentary Actions and Partnerships to Combat Green Corruption. Once again, I'd like to thank our incredible panelists for being here. Again, our keynote, Mr. Rodrigo, our panelist, Mr. Rafael, Mr. Juhani Grossman, who was online, as well as Mr. Fitriadi as well, Fitriadi Muslim. Thank you so much for your thoughts and for your active participation and in answering all of our questions. I do encourage you to continue the discussions outside of these sessions. I mean, we have a break coming up as well, I assume. So this could be an incredible opportunity for you to not only network, but also to gain insight. So that's all for me. Thank you for this opportunity to moderate. And I do hope this session is informative for everybody here. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace and blessings be upon you all.
Thank you, Bu Roro. Thank you, panelists, and thank you all participants for the interesting discussion at the second session. And now some information for the rest of our program today. We invite you all for a lunch, which is located at the ballroom 1, just next to this room. And then at 3:30, we invite delegates from ASEAN parliaments to come back again together for the SEAPAC assembly to decide on organizational matters. And then later today, SEAPAC chair invite all of you for a dinner at the Kudus restaurant. And tomorrow, we look forward to seeing you again for the third round discussion, which is located in Bogor. So we are going to gather at the Lobby Hotel, 8 a.m. tomorrow. That's from us, from the Secretariat, and thank you for your attention and wish you have a great day. Thank you.